Welcome to the third session of our international conference. My name is Camacho. I am the chair of the General Assembly of ICOM Portugal and an officer at the Museum Department of the Directorate General for Cultural Heritage of Portugal, and I will be serving as your moderator for this session. As we all know, education is at the very heart of museums since the beginning of these institutions. Nowadays, museum education policies, services and programs face many challenges regarding their role, value and effects. In this session, we will have the chance to listen to the views of the chairperson of two leading organizations in the museum field. Nardi, president of Conferência, Vuillaume, president of Nemo, the network of European museum organizations, and our third colleague, Mário, Antas, organizer of this conference, who will join us later in this gathering. Moving along to our session, please welcome Nardi, president of Conferência, who will be speaking to us on the role of education in museums. Before the presentation begins, allow me to introduce our guest speaker. Nardi is a professor in educational sciences in the University of Roma III and an author of the bibliography on the subject of museums, communication, and research. So I would like to welcome the presenters, the leader of the presentation. The floor is yours. Thank you.
First of all, I want to thank you to be here. I want to thank all the organizers, and I want to say that I'm not grateful to Mário Antas because he put my presentation in the best time in the worst time of the day, immediately after lunch, so we are all a little sleepy. I tried not to eat too much because it's terrible when the speaker is also. So now, just to go to the theme of my presentation, I think that I'm going to begin with something wider. And with the first one statement, I want to say how proud, how very proud I am to belong to ICOM. Why? Of course, because it's a very important organization of professionals. Other categories of professionals have their own category association. For instance, the doctors have some common rule. For example, Hippocrates set a set of rules for doctors. But what the difference with ICOM? ICOM is a leading organization. We know about each other. We share common documents, and we can influence the life of the organization. I think that this is really unique. And in particular, what is important and very outstanding in ICOM is the governance, the code of ethics, and the definition of museum. Now, for the first part, the governance, is you know that we have a president, and today we have the honor of having him here. We have a director general for all the administrative aspects. We have an executive council, which is a sort of parliament of ICOM. We have the General Assembly and the Advisory Committee. All these bodies are democratically elected except the a director general who needs to have specific skills. This year, we are going to elect each of us, each ICOM member has the right to vote inside their international community, inside the national communities, and for the whole life of ICOM. And this is worldwide. Can you imagine what a huge democratic organization we are? And this is why I was saying I am proud. We have, yes please, some documents that we all share. The Code of Ethics. It's very important that people who work in museums have a common direction. Here we have two examples. Code of Ethics does not allow a museum to buy an object whose origin is not very clearly stated. And in this way, that you see, this mask, archaeological mask found in Italy, was subtracted to the Getty Museum because the Getty Museum couldn't explain how they had acquired it. You see the importance? Because it means that it's not enough that you have money to make a collection. Ethical problems must be respected. The second example, it seems a tortoise, but it isn't. It's more detailed. This is what the Abu Dhabi Museum should be. It had to be opened a few years ago, but now the work is interrupted. I don't know for how much time. The beautiful project is by a French architect, Jean Nouvel, and the Louvre Abu Dhabi is under the cooperation, let's say cooperation, of the Louvre Museum. The Louvre Museum accepted to lend a part of their collections to this museum in order to open it. And then, during 30 years, they would have counseled the board of the museum in order to acquire their own collections. And here the problem started, because according to the Code of Ethics, each conservator has the right to work just for his museum. They can't give advice to other museums. In the same way in which they can't have a private collection that collides with the content of their museum. So, I think that ethics is an important aspect that we never see enough in our public life, because we are going through a terrible ethical crisis in politics, in economics, and in all important aspects of the civil life. And so it's important that we all share a code of ethics. Now, definition of museums. I'm going to show you a difficult text. And it's a text from Plato, the Phaedo. Because a definition is something very important, and we have to think about it. Because a definition is an overarching statement that must include all the different cases of reality that can be included in the field. So, what did Plato say? Have you ever thought that things which are absolutely equal were unequal, or that equality was inequality? So it seems so difficult to understand at the beginning, but if you read the second time, you will see how clever it is to put things in this way. No, never Socrates. Of course, Plato says says that it's Socrates, it's a dialogue between Socrates and a citizen. No, never Socrates. By the way, the method that Plato uses in the dialogues, it's a wonderful educational method, not to extract what people have in their mind. Then, these equal things are not the same as absolute equality. Not in the least, I see Socrates. So the first step in knowledge has been acquired. And yet, it is these equal things that have suggested and conveyed to you your knowledge of absolute equality, although they are distinct from it. Perfectly true. So when Socrates step by step makes things clearer, the person understands. Whether it is similar to them or dissimilar, certainly. So it makes no difference, says Socrates, so long as the sight of one thing suggests another to you, it must be a cause of recollection whether the things are alike or not. So the important word here is recollection. Now, when you judge, you make a comparison between what you have already in mind and what the new thing you are looking is. Recollection is one of the bases of learning. Now, it's a joke. Please go on. It's like saying, we see in reality many different breeds of dogs. So, what do we have in mind? The concept of dog eating. It's not my invention, because Plato uses the same analogy with horses. I prefer to put dogs because it's easier to see the differences. You see what I mean? So, this is a very important educational acquisition. What is similar, what is dissimilar, and why there are differences in what we see. So we have a mental category that it's like a classifying system, no? And it helps us putting things in place. Next one, please. So now, who would say that these three structures belong to the same category, museums? They are completely different, the one to the other. And it's easy for us to say, this is a museum, but it's very hard for students to recognize. So I want to answer the question, this morning question, and what I would say is that students should be aware that a museum is a very complex cultural object, very complex, because what we see in a museum comes out of three different histories. Each of one is very, very complicated. In Europe, the building can be something very complex in itself, because the building is a heritage monument as well, with its own conservation and preservation issues. Then we have the collection. Why do we have these objects here and not in a different place? What is the history of collections? What makes that in Rome we have certain objects and in Germany we have different objects? So the collection is something very complicated as well, because we can never complete it. Because the code of ethics says that we can't steal the pieces that we miss. At the beginning of the history of museums in America, what European conservators say, well, we can make copy for you, of the best of art, and then you can put them in your museum. But you see, it's not possible to have a museum of copies. It wouldn't be a museum. So, understand the collections is something very complicated. And again, we have similarities and disequalities. And here, what Susanne Bob said this morning can help us. Why the migrant objects, no? From here to there, and then back to the nation where they were produced, and so on. And eventually, but I want to go back to the problem of collection, the history of the institution. Because a museum must be instituted. So when was it instituted? By whom? Why? So to go back to the collection, the container of the collection. There we have Beauvais in France. You see, it's a very modern and eccentric. When we saw it for the first time, we said, oh, it's not possible, it's unfinished. Because it was a shock to see all these pipelines, all these service devices in view with so bright colors and so on. Now we are used to it, and we know that modern museums can be very original. No? Now we are getting used to that. The interior. Well, here you have a science museum, la Galerie de l'Évolution in Paris, that conveys a scientific idea. The Darwin idea of evolution. So we keep this structure, of course, but there are people who completely disagree. You know that in the States there are churches who refuse the idea of evolution and support the idea of creationist, which seems to us something completely impossible. But never mind. And then I put Louvre Lens. So I say that Louvre Abu Dhabi was something very controversial from the ethic point of view. Here we have a wonderful example of museum as social arena. Because Louvre Lens was built in a place that, Pas-de-Calais Nord, who suffered a lot during the Second World War, because all the armies went on and out from this area, destruction, lot of death, and so on. Besides, they had a terrible economical crisis because it was a region who produced charcoal, and now it's not a device that is so precious as it was in the past. Those unemployment and alcoholism of the population. Very, very serious problem. And so this is why the Louvre decided to open a museum in that area, sort of compensation to the population. And another very important feature, the collection. We are very used to see the collection organized according to two main principles. One is geographical origin, and the other one is the chronological order. If you go to the Gemäldegalerie Gallery in Berlin, you have different colors for the room according to the school, Flemish school, Italian school, French school, and so on. And then a sort of promenade through the ages. So we begin with archive paintings and we go on until our days. No, not really until our days, but until the 19th century. Here you have a complete different way of exhibiting the objects. because you have a big line of the time on a wall, and this is the vertical path, and in the horizontal path you have masterpieces produced in the same period in different parts of the world. So for the first time, we are not going to see a Renaissance painting and a chinoiserie that was produced in the same period in China. And I shouldn't use the term chinoiserie because it's a later definition. And so you see, we can compare what different culture produced at the same time. And this is a revolution, because until the end of the 18th century, when museums were internationally established, the criteria were the one I mentioned to you. We know that there was a big debate in Dresden, for instance. Part of this debate took place because it was a scientific way of organizing the collection. But in 1792, when the Louvre was opened to the public as a way to reinforce citizenship, one of the ideas was to alternate schools and periods, and the Deputy of Parliament supported this idea, saying, we want the visitor go through the collections like a visitor of a garden who is influenced by the different colors and the different shapes of different flowers. So you see, it was the opposite idea that was suggested. Eventually, the scientific idea brought up by Germany, well, we shouldn't say Germany at the time, was adopted. And we are all used to this way of presenting collections. But we have to keep in mind that it's not the only one. And so Louvre Lens is a very revolutionary museum because they changed this idea. And it's very strange for us to go through a museum that is made in this way. The second revolutionary idea of Louvre Lens is that it is a real social idea. Because before deciding which pieces of art had to be translated in this museum, the Louvre organized focus groups with the population to ask them, would you like this or would you like that? Can you imagine? They refused Baldassare Castiglione portrait painted by Raphael. I was very relieved because it's one of my favorite paintings in the Louvre, and the world to Louvre Lens is much more difficult. But this is the joke. They had their word to say in the choice of the pieces of art. And as we have very often noticed in our studies about the publics, many people, even well-educated people, think that once they have visited a museum, it's for the whole life. So when we speak about non-visitors, we tend to imagine deprived people. But it's not the same, because we have non-visitors who are well-educated people who go to all the exhibitions, because we have to say, have you seen the last Raphael exhibition in Paris? Oh yes, it was wonderful. You see, and it's like salon conversation, no? It's fashionable to say, I went to the last exhibition. Proprio perché è la Scuderia del Quirinale, you must go there, because it's the bourgeois appointment. So, to avoid this risk, and this is a new aspect of museum education, because it's, in fact, it's museum diseducation. What did they do? And I really like this idea. Every year, they changed 10% objects. They keep the idea of the time and of the geographical distribution, but they change the object. This is why every year you find a new catalog in the museum. And this is to tell the population, you thought you went to the museum once for all, but now we have new pieces. Come again and please visit us. The other part, behind the stage, the museum has a lot of activity. We were amazed yesterday visiting the Archeology Museum to see the huge amount of little pieces of tiles that they are restoring, trying to put them together and to discover what they mean. The public, the general public, has no idea of that. And so in Vuillaume, the restoration department is visible. You go in the first floor underground, there is a very big crystal window, and you see the restorators doing their work. You see the devices that museums use in order to transport pieces of art. Imagine transport a statue, marble statue, or a big-size painting. This is something the public is absolutely unaware of. So this is to say why it's so complicated. So I think that we should give an idea of this concept, because otherwise we don't understand what the museum is. We don't understand. I like to speak in terms of language. So we have a syntax in a museum, and we have the grammar. The grammar are the objects. So we have the grammar of object and the syntax of the whole collection. So, and it's a play between these two dimensions. It's like when we speak, we have to choose our words carefully, but we also have to put them in the right order. To understand the museum, we need an idea of its syntax, and this is the history of the building, the history of the collection, the history of the institution, and then we need to have some examples, which is the grammar. And here, our project, our mini project, is paramount. Thank you. Now, well, so I'm going to go quickly. So this is the museum definition of ICOM, we all know it, but notice that the first part is about the reality, no? We describe the reality. The second part is about the mission, and one of the mission is education. Yes, I'm going to try to go quickly. Yes, museums education. It seems so obvious that I don't want to comment. No. But what is education? What is education? This is a real question we have to ask ourselves. Education, in the etymological meaning, comes from the Latin educere, which means, how can I translate it in English? To drive out of. To drive out of. And this is the Socratic dialogue, no? We have to extract from each person what they can give. And this is why we speak about a new relationship between the visitor and the museum. We can't have a message that is good for everyone. But I would like to go a little further. Education is an activity that all human species have, because it's an adaptation to life. So, when a dog has, again, her small puppies, she has have to learn them how to walk, how to get their food, and so on. For human beings, the adaptation is much longer and, of course, much more complicated and influenced by time and space. We have many different forms of education according to the space and according to the time. This is something that we have to keep in mind when we address visitors in a museum. So this is the grammar. And unfortunately, I don't have time, but I began a little later. So perhaps I can ask you to describe what you see. You know this painting? No. Well, it's a fresco by Angelico. No, sorry, it's La Predella of an altar, big altar piece, and it's dedicated to the saints Cosma and Damiano, protectors of the Medici family, because in Italian Medici means doctor. And so you see here the two doctors operating a man who was hurt in the leg, and they had to cut the leg. Now, they put a new leg to his body, and look at the leg. Consider that it was not a time for protheses. What is the leg? What is the color of the leg? It's black. So, what can we think about it? I'm going to leave you with two questions. It could be the painter desired to show the new leg. So if it were white, we couldn't appreciate it. Or it could be the racist attitude, because they didn't care about black people's life. So I'm going to leave you with the two questions, because they are in the heart of the social array. So the next example, I don't want to comment it, it's more complicated, and so, no, we don't have time, I'm sorry. And so, this is a sentence that Mario helped me writing, so it's not my good Portuguese, but the feeling is sincere. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Emma, for addressing this so interesting topic for all of us, and I am sure that in the questions and the answers, the time we'll have the chance to answer many questions of our participants. Our next speaker is Vuillaume, President of Nemo, the Network of European Museum Organizations, who will be talking about the educational value of museums. David has been the head of the joint office of the Swiss Museums Association and of ICOM Switzerland since 2006, and he has experience in project work at various museums and institutions, and in 2014 he was elected as the chairman of museums. I have had the chance of meeting David in the context of Nemo activities, and I am very happy to welcome him in Portugal and have the chance to share with us the 4 values defined by the Nemo for museums, and in particular the educational value.
Thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the nice introduction. I have learned a lot today, and it's my turn now to give you some thoughts about the educational value of museums. It's difficult after the presentation of Emma, but I will try. The educational value of museum was the subject of the last meeting of Nemo, last year in Pilsen in November with the title Revisiting the Educational Value of Museums. Why education in this year and why revisiting? Why education? That's obvious because education is at the heart of the museum purposes. You know now, I mean, you know by heart the definition of ICOM, but it's always interesting to read this very long definition, but a very good definition. Everybody wants to change the definition, but at the end, since 2004, all people say, okay, we want to change, but it's good, it's okay. It's not perfect, but it's okay. We saw the definition before with Emma. I just have tried to reorganize this definition, really to take time to see what's in it. A museum is a non-profit, permanent institution open to the public. What do the museum? It acquires, conserves, research, communicates, and exhibits, but it's not a goal, it's just a mean. What is acquires, conserved, research, etc., tangible and intangible evidence of people and the environment? For what the purpose here is 3: study, education, and enjoyment. Education at the end of the definition, but very central in the heart. That is the purpose of the museum, but it's not the goal. The ultimate goal of a museum is to serve society and its development. It means ICOM says or recommends us in a democratic way, so we agree all, to serve, to develop society. So we have, if we want to follow this definition, we have the responsibility to be political, not only philosophical, to be political, to have a political impact. That is the definition of 2004, but the question of education, of course, is a long history. 200 years, at the beginning of the 19th century, the education became the center of the purpose and the goals of museums. I just have one example, this beautiful museum that doesn't exist in this building, a big museum in Cologne, the Museum of Cologne, at the beginning of the 19th century, became a big legacy of the World War, which changed the name, and the new director in 1880 decided to settle 3 objectives of this new museum: the entertainment of the foreigners, the education of the inhabitants, and the interest of the homeland. So today we would say for entertainment of the foreigners, maybe tourism. For interest of the homeland, we would speak about identity, maybe citizenship. And to speak about education, today we would use the word education. The same word, but a completely different meaning today. 200 years of development of education, 200 years of development of museum changed, of course, the meaning. So why revisiting the education value of museum? Because museum constantly adapt to the changing and specific needs of the public. That is one thing that is important. And the second thing is museums have not just adapt, but they have more possibility to use educational processes, because we know much more about what is the different education process. For example, you know maybe this chart here, this continuum between receptive learning to participatory learning, spectating learning, involving, enabling, and inventing. That is a different way to learn, a different way to educate that the museum has to master today. So it has changed. And that is also a simplified, a very simplified way, sorry, Emmanuel know that better, but simplified way also to think, to show the evolution of the understanding of learning. So it's why we have to revisit, to rethink what is education regularly. And we can ask regularly this question, how museum can exploit at best their educational potential. And I would like to try to answer this question today for today. I mean, 10 years, the answer will be different, 10 years ago, the answer was different. But before I come back to this question, I would like to say some words about Nemo, about the network of European Museum Organization, because we are in an ICOM conference, and maybe you don't know exactly what is Nemo, just an overview, and that will lead us back to this question of education potential. What is Nemo? Nemo is a network of national museum associations and similar bodies. We take in every country of the members of the Council of Europe. I would say the best networks, the more efficient networks, sometimes is the ICOM committee, sometimes not, but we work with ICOM committees. So the network that have the best impact on the politics and on the museums. We have members in 35 members states of the Council of Europe. We have been founded in 1992, so just after the Maastricht Treaty. So the European single markets have been created, and we wanted to be there with this huge network of museums, and we have our office in Berlin. Together, when we count all the museums in the network, Nemo's members speak for over 30,000 museums in Europe, and Nemo is acknowledged by the European Commission as the voice of museum in Europe. We are not the only museum organization in Europe. We work with EMF, EMA, of course, ICOM, but the European Commission wants to have one contact, and they sustain and support this network. They have supported it for 20 years, so it's one of the only network that have been supported by us so a long time. So to be represented for the museums, we have asked us, and we do that regularly, what are the values that the European museums stand for. And we found 4 values. That is the current values we defend today. The first value, of course, is the collection value. Collection is the core value of every museum. I think that is obvious. This is not obvious for some politicians and some actors in the economy. The collection value, the core value of the museum, and what does it mean if we want to use this very important value to have a goal? The goal of Nemo is that museum collection has to be so widely accessible as possible to all citizens. And accessibility means, of course, physically accessibility, but also digitally accessible, and the collection has to be mobile also. So just as an example, what we did in the last year with the European Commission, we edited this toolkit to reduce physical, legal, and funding barriers in order to encourage collection mobility. It was the result of all institutes where Nemo played a very important role. Second value, other value, because all the values are the same importance. I just want to present the education value at the end because it's our subject today. The economic value, we believe that museum can be incubator for creativity and innovation. We spoke about that this morning already. So as a goal, we want museum to be recognized for the economic value they produce. Museum costs a lot, but they bring also a lot of economic value, a lot of money. We are very happy to disseminate this kind of studies. There are a lot of these kind of studies. It's super interesting to disseminate this kind of studies. This one is a study about the Finnish museum, and the study finds that the museum increased the regional economy by 32 to 49 euro per visitor. So it's very, in a country like Finland, when you visit a museum, you take your car a long time. It's a big country. You take a coffee. You take you bring with your family, and you go to restaurants and so on and so on. And you have at the end really it's not less. Third value is social value. European Museum stands for social value. Museums are meeting places where different points of view can be shared. That is not obvious in our the development of society of politics. There's a lot of polarization, a lot of social tension. The museum is a place where you can go, where you can like or dislike the work of art you are looking at, or you can agree or not agree about how history is presented. Of course, the ideal way, so this morning, is to have multiple points of view in the museum. But as a visitor, if you have another point of view, you are welcome in the museum. And that is very important. We have to stand for that, because it's not obvious in Europe, it's not obvious in other continents in the world. So we want museums to be recognized as organizations that can have a significant social impact. If different people can access the museum, we can have an impact outside of the cultural field on, for example, the field of health, the field of poverty, so all the social subjects. If we want to, we can, and I think it's important. In Europe, I will come back to that after. An example of interesting campaigns by our member in the UK, the Museum Association, the UK Museum Association. A guideline with a lot of testimonies, guidelines, recommendations, best practice, how museums can change lives, how museum can enhance well-being, how museum can create better places, how museum can inspire people and ideas. And I cannot refrain from quoting Michel Magnier, Director for Culture and Creativity of the European Commission, who was at our last meeting. He said, museums are agora and open to society at large. Definitely they can make our lives better. It's a beautiful statement by public servant by the European Commission. And the last, not least, of course, education value. We emphasize the fact that museums are places of formal and non-formal learning, and we want two things. First, we want legislators on national and European level to understand and promote the role that museums play regarding education. Because sometimes in different national countries you have education is only on the side of the school, and the museum are in another department, sometimes not together, they cannot work together. You know that in your country better than I. And we want also that other learning institutions recognize museums are their natural partner. Of course, schools and other institutions in the field. And to achieve these goals, we do three things. The most important thing is advocacy. We are very often in Brussels, of course, that is our main place to work, and to try to have an influence on the politicians in the Parliament and in the European Commission. We share all the documents we can find about all the studies we have. If you go on the website, you will see hundreds of documents about these goals, these values. And we collaborate, of course, with all the organizations and sometimes outside of Europe to try to reinforce our goals. So, in the field of education, Nemo believes that museums, when offering opportunities for formal and informal learning to people of all profiles, can inspire, engage, and help them understand the world in which they live. Beautiful program, beautiful philosophical program. So reality is not completely the same. In the reality, a lot of museums may well be a place for learning, while remaining conservative, elitist, and excluding a large part of citizens. Think just about the last exhibition opening in the world. If you were in an art museum, for example, you were invited to the first VIP opening with champagne, or the second opening for important people with wine, or the public opening at the end, the officially opening the third one, and you get some orange juice, and you saw around you saw only white people, no children, everyone with academic backgrounds, etc. So just as a symbol, of course, you can organize the opening as you want, but that is a symbol of museums are not automatically open to the all profiles. So we come back to this question: how can museums exploit at best their educational potential? I have found 3 conditions to be able today to exploit this potential, and like in this picture, it's just a work in progress. I am to say exactly what you have to do, but it's just some thoughts coming from our last conference and all different publications. So museums which exploit their full educational potential are first ready to learn, secondly ready to rethink their social role, and ready to collaborate. So about this readiness to learn, a quotation from our last conference: if learning is at the core of museum mission, then developing and honoring employees' learning competencies should also be part of it. And that is very important. A lot of museums don't have a budget line for the professional development of their workers, of their employees. So how do you want to be a place, to a learning place for the visitor, if you are not able to learn? How do you want to adapt your program to the different public if you cannot have different staff training? That is not possible. You are not legitimized to do that. An example from my country, I consider, I'm proud of that. 20 years ago, we began to give the possibility at a very, very cheap rate to the museum professional to learn from other museum professionals. Then we have coordinated that. We have now, Archeology became now the most important training program in Europe in Switzerland for the museum professional. We have last year 21 different courses, different subjects. The courses are given 1, 2, or 3 times. They last from 1 to 80 days. And last year we had 526 participants, and we could have much more. We are a non-profit organization, so we cannot we can be bigger and bigger, but every year we have more museum professionals, just because they are not expensive. We have to pay to go there, not a lot, because we want to have motivation of people, not just that they have to go. And the second thing is we learn from other museum professionals. But another example, not to learn from museum professionals, but to learn from people outside of the museum. Field is museums. I think we know this participative workshop comes from France. There are a lot of projects in Belgium, in Quebec, but also now Germany, in Switzerland, in Italy. I met last 2 weeks ago the Museumix Italy project. They don't have a participative workshop now, but it will come here and here. So Museumix is a workshop where the museum invites specialist experts in new technologies, but not working in the museum, to learn together how they can have prototype to help museum to achieve their education goals. And another level that is important to me in the field of education is also the readiness to learn at the level of museum networks. It's important, I think, to give museum networks the possibility to learn from each other. In Eastern Europe, museum networks are competitive and organized and have sometimes not a lot of resources. And Nemo organized learning exchanges between the museum network. And I think that this could be a model. I think we are legitimized to be places to learn if you learn in the museum profession, if you learn from other people, and if you learn also on the level of networks. Then we can really, yes, we have the legitimacy to do learning processes. Now the second point, museums that are ready to rethink their social role. A quotation, another one from Nadia from she was board member of ICOM Portugal, and now she's executive director of Access Culture. She says, I don't see museums as island. I can't conceive cultural institutions remaining untouched by what's going on around them. And indeed, it's going, a lot of things happens around us today in Europe. Of course, the refugee crisis in Hungary, or ultranationalism, also in Hungary, sorry, but that is a threat for social cohesion in Europe. Polarization, political polarization is a picture from Parliament in Ukraine. The generation issues are of course a major trend. Very important issue here, a project from Switzerland. Everything okay? Yeah. The revenue and the wealth gap, the picture from London, that is a very threat for social cohesion in Europe. And unemployment, the youth unemployment here in Greece. So we have a lot of things to do if we want to have a social impact. And a lot of okay. And if we want to have a social impact, we have to rethink the definition of education. So one quotation, education no longer requires convening content of information about the collection. Not only, but today, Mário, board member of Nemo, says education aims to achieve inclusion, intercultural dialogue, public engagement, participation, and community empowerment. We know these kind of programs, but it's a necessity in Europe if we want to follow the democratic definition of museum life. But we have to be more political. And if you decide that all the museums don't have to decide to have a social impact, but if you want to decide to do that, you will find a lot of different partners, a lot of money, because politics is ready to give money. Just an example, 2 weeks ago we were in Brussels with our Secretary General, and she was asked to give some from 2015, so before the real refugee crisis. And she found in working 2 hours, 28 projects in Europe, network project, and projects supported by governments or by the European Union. So if you have an idea, if you want to begin some project, please just ask us, and we can give you some other examples of good practice. And the last thing, ready to collaborate, is I go very quickly. To fulfill their potential as relevant and trusted gathering places for their various communities, museums need to be highly connected. That is a quotation by Frederick from the Asia-Europe Museum Association, partner of Nemo. Museums have to be connected with their audience. That is, for example, publication of the Nemo, learning museum project, which introduced the relation between museum and young people with regards to motivation and methodology to improve accessibility and engagement. So, connection to visitors, but also connection to other different organizations, other museum professionals. Nemo has 3 working groups: the LEB, the Learning Museum, that is fully the subject, Museum and Creative Industry, and Intellectual Property Right. 3 projects that are essential to the accessibility of museums. And last example, yes, we have to connect with other organizations, not only the museum team. Here is a recommendation from the UK that say that the museum, library and archive networks could act as a backbone of a joint lifelong learning sector. And there is a lot of recommendation how to work together. Very easy, 7 points, extremely useful and practical. So the last word, last quotation from Madeleine Van Kerty from the AAM, the American Alliance Museum, the main partner of Nemo outside of Europe. She said the next era of education will be characterized by learning designed to foster critical thinking, synthesis of information, innovation, creativity, teamwork, and collaboration. A lot of goals, we have a lot of responsibility we have. So my last word would be, if we keep working together toward these goals in a coordinated way, I think that is the magical word, coordination, we can achieve our vision of museum as places that allow us to better understand the complex world in which we live and to find our place within it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, David, for sharing your view and Nemo's view on this relevant topic. Finally, let me introduce Mário Antas, one of the organizers of this conference, who will be telling us about what objects and approaches new trends in museum education. Mário has a PhD in museology with physics on museum education, and he works at this National Museum of Archeology. Mário, I will give you the floor, and I thank you if you could shorten a little your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mário. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Well, first of all, I would like to make a statement. For me, it's very difficult to speak after Emma, my dear friend Emma, and David, because they said already everything about museum education. So my task will be more easier. And second, I'm the last one before the coffee break, so I will try to keep it simple and keep it in a good mood as well. So, this brief presentation will be about new trends, or so-called new trends in museum education. We have a lot of work done by several organizations, international organizations, by the Council of Europe, by ICOM, and there is a lot of work and a lot of things going on, especially networking. And your last slide, David, I think is a very good point of situation, what is happening right now in the museum's education. So, I think everybody understood right now that we are dealing with a new paradigm in museum education, in museum communication. So I think that our challenge now is to switch from museum education to museum learning, because we have to understand the learning process is active process, ongoing process, like David and Nemo said before, but actually we have to think that we are the first learners of the museum, that we work in museums, because we learn a lot with our colleagues and with our visitors as well. Different points of view, different approaches, and I take this opportunity as well to invite you to go to the big opening of the exhibition that is going to be at 6 p.m. One object, many visions, in the core of any project, of course. And this is a challenge, it's provocative, so I don't say anymore, so I'll spoil the surprise of that. Okay, so, wow, when we talk about learning theories, okay, come on, you stay here 3-4 hours and everybody will sleep, but I will not talk about this. This is a very interesting European project as well. They try to make some point of situation of the core of different educational models, and now we are right talking about non-formal models of education and formal models of education. So, let's skip this boring part of presentation and go to the basis. And the basis is from the latest decade of 20th century, when this subject of education was pushed and bring to the museum's core by now the so-called American Alliance of Museums. And of course, I will not going to read that. Of course, the key role of education in museums and engaging the visitors about with collections and the objects, because we have different objects, different approaches, and most of all visitors have their own opinion about their objects. They, like Anne said before, it's our personal view of objects that turn the museum so beautiful. Museums are beautiful because everybody sees the objects and the museums in a different eyes, their own eyes, with the heart, with the soul, but they see their own vision. Okay, so we have these things, and I have the pleasure to have in the room most of my colleagues from ICOM Portugal and colleagues from communication as well. And of course, we are based right now in face-to-face communication in museums, and also in the distant communication, like we always do with our gadgets like smartphone, tablets. We are always checking the social media, especially in Europe, Facebook and Twitter and so on. So we have to deal with that and try to give answers, or try to understand better this new era of communication and learning process. About learning theories, there are these few theories over there. From Linda Kelly, is an Australian thinker. Museums as centers of non-formal learning. Participatory museum like Nina Simon is American thinker. And our colleagues from Sweden, museums as a social arena that we talked before. So, this is the main frame of the non-formal education theories right now in museums. Of course, there are plenty of more theories, but we don't have time to speak about them. And the most important is face-to-face educational communication, but where is the innovation? Okay, we have a lot of theory, we read a lot, okay, we share a lot, but the thing where, how can I innovate? Of course, I don't have the answer for that. I'm not a musician. I work in a museum. I try to understand better the publics. That's what I'm doing with my colleagues. And this is a teamwork and network as well. And of course, we need to understand the special needs, the needs of our specified groups. So, I think it's my first step. Research allows us to understand better our publics. And of course, for me, this is our key word, first publics. How can we understand better the specific group of publics of our museums? They are all different. And the answer for me is research. We need to make more scientific studies, like Nemo published, like ICOM published, and these studies are made in a very large base. For instance, I give an example of Italy. I have Emma and the other Italian colleagues in the room, that I thank you. They make a study about how the public saw the museums, in this case Uffizi Galleries in Florence, and the results were quite, let's see. First, the most important artwork, of course, they want to see the Spring Bertolini from Botticelli. Second, selfies. Everybody knows what is selfies. Of course. Everybody wants to take a photo in the front of the measured art piece of work. And the third, they want to make photographs of the walls, shadows, and colors. It's a little bit strange, but people like to see, like the details, like these things. So this is a very important study, not only in Italy, but for all Europe, to understand better our audience, and of course we need to do more of these studies. I can only make, all the educational teams can make better job if you understand what kind of public visits our museums. Okay, so educational departments in museums are no more associated just to a schools department. But, of course, we need to overcome the internal stigmas, because at the beginning, whoa, everybody knows the educational service in museums are a little bit the second part of the museum. First is curating, okay, we'll talk about that. So, we need to go overcome and make more visible our work as museum mediators in museums, but not only in museums, but for society, as of course David said before. So, I give another example. Right now, 23% of Portuguese population have more than 65 years old, which means that, for instance, we make a study in this museum, and we conclude that senior population don't visit this museum. So, this museum is missing one part, significant part of Portuguese population, because we have only a few programs for them. So this is what we call in the framework of IMI project, the non-public of this museum. So we pick in IMI project and try to engage this non-public. And we have other non-publics like young adults, for instance. They only came in the school visits, not by themselves, because archaeology, okay, is movies like Hollywood. It's boring to go to archaeological museum. So, we have to recenter our speech and to understand better what are our main targets. In this kind, experience, participation, and I missed something. Okay, let's go to the use of new technologies as tools of educational mediation. I think here we have to think, I love new technologies. I cannot live without my smartphone. Of course, I have to be connected. But nowadays, we have to face the problem, like Castle said in a book very well known, the galaxy, Internet Galaxy. Okay, the speed of information is very high. So we cannot compete with, like Luís Raposo said, in the morning, boulevards and so on. That's not the main frame of the museums. But we have to go in the same way. Which means we can use virtual reality, augmented reality, of course. We are using right now, and we're going to use in this exhibition today. But we need to use in the clever, in the smart way, which means that not only use for using, but using to go in the direction of our main goals, which means the core of the museum. If the core of my museum is to communicate archaeology, I will make augmented reality about archaeological artifacts. I will not make augmented reality about a football game, of course. So sometimes we have some kind of enterprising of offering services, but we have to focus in our scientific point of view, which is the core of each museum. Nowadays, people think that the 3D replica are the future of museums. In some museums, this is present. It is possible right now. There are a lot of museums, especially in the United States. The Smithsonian have a program that you can download, you buy a replica, 3D replica, and you can print it in, Staples, sorry for the publicity, or something like that. So it's bring one image of the artifact to your home is appropriation of common heritage. Okay, I have a replica of this and this and this. So we have to think the consequences of this in the future and how to face it and to reinvent and renovate the museum. And the third the last point, yes, thank you, is networking. Of course, in Portugal, we have a lot of network of museums. I have the pleasure to have a network of Algarve museums over here. But we have to keep in mind that we still need more to learn from each other. Keep networking all the time. Because life is experience and we have to go to this experience. Okay, so in face-to-face educational communication, there are two thinkers. They are from Asia that make this strange, like the generations of cell phones, 3G, 4G, 5G, and so on and so on. So for them, the future of the museums is museum 6G, which means museums as management centers of integration of cultural resources. What a huge task! How to get there? I think the problem is here, how to get there if some of our museums are in third or fourth generation of this thinking. So we are facing a lot of changes in the very speedy way, but we have to understand. And I give you this for communication on social media. Okay, this is a graphic about, in this case, the use of two social media platforms, in this case Facebook and Twitter. And in a very basic analysis, I can say that Facebook is more used in European museums and Twitter is more used in American museums. And the reason is, what is the reason? It's simple. The speed of communication in America is most faster than in Europe. The needs of the publics are different. They are tweeting all the time, making tweets and so on. And in Europe, even the greatest museums like the Louvre and the British use more Facebook. So we have a lot of things to show. I will keep this, and I just want to say that we all know that the social networks, but the most important thing is not to create more. For instance, for our museums, we don't need to create more profiles in every social media platform that appears. We have to manage every day the platforms that our museums have. Otherwise, people will not go there anymore. For instance, if you have a Facebook without any posts, or nobody goes there, it's boring. People want information. So let's post and share things like a detail of a conservation process of an artifact, a detail of a masterpiece, a detail of the building, a communication, a conference like this. We need to engage visitors, but for that we need to be clever and make a very good use of social media in our profit, which means we have to work every day and post several things during the day. Of course, this is difficult because the lack of resources in our museum and all the museums, especially in Portugal, but okay, we are used to that. So, museums and education for 21st century. I put all the things over here, starting with research, visibility, participation, experience, sharing, and utility. We cannot lose the utility of the information that we are sharing. So, what we learn is we need to learn how to communicate, how to educate, and especially learn to learn. Especially learn to learn. And we can only learn if you are engaged in the learning process. Which means I learn from my colleagues, I learn from the visitors as well. So, the conclusion, museums must or became alive and enjoyable when the visitors felt they are co-producers of knowledge as well. They have the chance to go to the museum and start to think about that particular object and build their own, in this case, knowledge of that process. And if they have the chance to share it with the persons that work in the museum, even better. So, as David said before, for me, social participation is the key to build a happy museum. And a happy museum is full of persons with different perspectives, like in your project. Thank you.
Mário, I want to thank you for your interesting and speedy presentation. Now we are very comfortable about the time. And we come to questions and answers section. We will have time for a couple of questions. Please don't forget to mention your name and institution. And so, who wants to start?
Non può fare preguntas.
Grazie mille per la spiegazione bellissima, simple e profonda. della definizione del ruolo del museo. Grazie.
This is not lunch time. It was lunch time anymore.
But it is coffee break time.
Good afternoon. Thank you for exhibitions. I would like to know what kind of a participation could be profitable to the audience, to the audience, to enjoy museums and to go more often to these kind of buildings and exhibitions.
Could you mention your name, please?
Joaquim.
Institution?
Well, I'm a university student. I'm making a post-degree on museums. Therefore, I am interested in the participation of the audience. Thank you.
You open a huge debate, and we only have a few minutes to answer to you. What I would like to say is that in every museum there is a very good educational center, almost in all. What we miss, in my opinion, and I'm always looking for what we are missing, excuse me, there is a matter of character, is a sort of feeling that can link all the different activities. And an idea of mine that I would like to express in a European project done with schools, university and museum would be to consider the language as our philology, because we have a deep responsibility in fighting against illiteracy. Illiteracy is today a phenomenon that affects people who went to school. So you see, this is what I see as the future of the museum. Museum is a very complex cultural place. We can use it to develop linguistic skills. But we should have a common method. And that would be, I think, very valuable for each of us, because sometimes I have the impression that we do a lot of work, but we don't have a scientific measure of what we are doing. And this is what I would like to develop in the future for an enjoyable museum.
Thank you for the question. I would like to share just a little experience about senior publics. Last year we have an exhibition here about underwater archaeology called Time Salvage to the Sea. It was about several artifacts found on the Portuguese coast. We fought in the framework of the project some activities with senior population. So we called the municipality of Lisbon and the Belém seniors. Belém is a neighborhood where we actually are, and they came to the museum, and we asked them to tell stories about the sea. Put the objects in front of them, and they tell the stories about that objects. And we asked permission to videotape that because I think it's our immaterial heritage, our memories out in material heritage as well. So they have a lot of stories. We learn a lot because they look to the objects and they say something like this: Oh, from my father I remember for a similar object, and they told several stories about that. We have the record that, and I think it was a good way. In that day, I was completely, my soul was full of memories and information, good information. I learned a lot with the seniors of Vuillaume, no matter the academic formation of them, because they all have stories to say. So it was so important, this kind of sharing. We want to do more, of course, because it cannot only be one isolated experience. We have to try to engage and repeat in order to reach that non-public, in this case of this museum. So sometimes the experiences are good. This is one good experience that I just want to share with you.
I don't want to answer the question directly, but just to mention something that is important. I think participation doesn't replace all the other ways to learn. I think it's important to bear it in mind that today, of course, participation fits particularly well with democracy, democratic thinking. It's politically supported, it's completely in the air, and that is a good thing. That is a new possibility for museums. But the other way to learn, or the former ways to learn, have to be also developed. And so sometimes you visit a museum and you really want to be active and to participate and to be in a big project. You just want to be passive, and you should have this opportunity too. The most important thing is that we use all the possibilities to give the audience, but not only the customers, also the citizens. The citizens, what they are expecting from the museum, and what they cannot find in other things. They don't replace it. It's important today, but it doesn't replace anything what we did before.
Any other questions? I have a question for David. There's a question on museum policies and the European level. You shared with us the role of Nemo in advocacy at the European and the national levels. And regarding the topic that joins us together on museum education in European museums, how do you see the current policies of European decision makers, and what kind of hope do you have right now on this issue? I know it's
a big question. I think it's the fact that Nemo I've worked for 20 years is a good thing, but also a bad thing. We have to remind in the European Parliament, the European Commission, the whole time, every year, sometimes the same things, because we have to say culture in general and museum in particular, but on national level the same, are not very high in the agenda. Sometimes we use time when Italy, for example, had the presidency. Culture was really, it was a momentum we had to use all our connection to have the possibility to improve, to have a word. Obviously, we did a lot of different policies, and then now we see it's more calm. So, but they are not. We don't have a European museum policy because we don't have a European cultural policy in general, and on national level we have the same describe the way. What I can say is, when we see the 20 years, culture become more and more important for the European Commission. So it was nothing at the beginning, and it just a little bit now, but it's more. Really, the line is a good development because of the necessity of the activation of other actors as political actors for social issues. I think that is the today. We cannot replace what the politics does, but we have to play our role. And so we have to use this. I hope I have understood.
Thank you. So we come to the end part of this session. Let me thank again to our three presenters for their interesting, informative, and highly reflexive presentations. We go to the coffee break and we come back at 4:30. No? Yes, 4:30.